Now it's on. Thank you. Well, everybody, welcome. Hope we can have a good class today. We're going to start at Mark chapter 11, verse 12. And as I said before, these sections get longer, but they go quicker. We're going to get through, I hope we get into chapter 12 today, but we're getting close. And by the way, that means we're about 3/4 of the way through Mark. I haven't said anything to Ted, who I think I saw, but he's going to want to know when I'm going to be finished. We may be finished in 4 or 5 weeks at the most. So I'll probably talk to him about that. Anyway, let's get started with Mark. Okay, where are we in the story of the life of Jesus? Well, he has now come to Jerusalem. And if you look at the verse just before verse 12, this is Jesus entering Jerusalem for the last time. Because he comes to Jerusalem on a Sunday. The following Sunday, 7 days later, is when he rises from the dead. We're within a week now of the time of Jesus dying, being raised from the dead, and ascending back into heaven. Verse 11 says, Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. Okay? So on verse 12, the next day, this is Monday. And then down here in verse 20, we're going to say in the morning. So that's Tuesday. Now after that, we lose the days. It's hard to connect what happens on this, that, and the other day. But when we get closer to it, we'll know that it's Thursday, because it'll say 2 days before the Passover, stuff like that. Okay, anyway, verse 12. Are we going? I want to read down through verse 18. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. You ever think of Jesus as being violent? He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have made it a den of robbers." He's violent, and he's very, very blunt and condemning here. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about the tree here a little bit in a minute, but let's stop right there and talk about this a little bit. So let's skip talking about the tree for right now. He came in, he entered the temple courts. What does it mean when it says the temple court? C-O-U-R-T. That's not a judgment place. What is that? It's a big area. We might call it a courtyard. Same kind of thing, And it's a very big area. I've never been to Jerusalem, but my mom and dad went, my sister and her brother went, and it's a very large open area there. And it was a very large open area then that had the temple with a wall around it, kind of toward the middle of it. And what was happening in the temple courts, not in the wall where the temple itself was, but in this large area. He says what was happening. Everybody was buying and selling there. People wanted to offer animals at the temple, but many times they didn't bring animals with them, so they would buy them when they got to Jerusalem. So they had a big bunch of people right there in the temple grounds selling stuff, okay? Selling doves, it says. And Jesus is angry. Why was Jesus angry? We read it, but you tell me. Why was he angry? He was... Well, he says something different than that. I'm sorry? Yeah, den of thieves. They're making a bunch of money. doing this. But there's something else you got to think about. If you've got a big courtyard area full of animals, what are you also getting? Noise. And if people are buying and selling, they're talking to each other. It was very noisy there. And what's one of the things that he says? My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations. It's a little hard to have prayer when there's a lot of noise going on. You see what I'm saying? And people would pray in the courtyards, except here, hard to pray when there's people running around buying and selling and there's a lot of noise. The last verse here is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of robbers. This sounds like one sentence here, but if you look at the notations down below, a house will be called a house of prayer is C, and that's, you look down there, that's a quotation from Isaiah 56:7. But if you look at the next part, but you have made it a den of robbers, that's Jeremiah 7:11. You see that? He's quoting from two different books out of the Old Testament that he links together. You know, that weren't linked together in the books because it's two different books, okay? But he's saying that it was supposed to be a place of quiet where people could pray, but these folks had made it bad. And that's why he was angry at them. Because in Jesus' mind, and to lots of people today, what is that place? I'm leading you, and I'm not telling you enough to give me an answer. To a lot of people, this place was holy ground back then. This was where God's temple was. This is where people had come for hundreds and hundreds of years to worship God. And they should have shown respect. They could have sold those animals out in the city, but they sold them in there. They didn't have to do that. Okay, anyway. Any comments down through verse 17? Okay. Verse 18, 19. Let's see. Let's say just 18 and 19. What are the reactions of the rulers of the temple? Well, right here it talks about it. The chief priests and the teachers of the Jews. Well, they're right there. That's where they were all the time. Heard this, heard what? About him doing what he did, the violence and the condemning, and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. The crowd is liking what he's saying. It was their prayers that had been interrupted, and so forth. But the people who were the leaders right here say, they started talking about how they could kill him. Is this the first time in Mark we've heard that the leaders were talking about killing Jesus? No. A couple of chapters back when they got upset at him, they got to talking and said, we got to get rid of this guy. How are we going to do it? Okay. Verse 19 through 25. When evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, this is Tuesday, as they went along, he saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered. I always had a hard time understanding why he said they're talking about the fig tree and then what Jesus says next. So think about this. He's not bringing up a new subject here in the verses we're going to read here starting at verse 22. He's talking still about that tree and the killing of the tree. Verse 21, Peter remembered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered. Verse 22, have faith in God. And I thought, well, what does that have to do with the fig tree? Jesus answered, truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. Can you see why maybe I thought for years that this was a whole different subject? No, it isn't. Now, let's go back to the fig tree. When Peter says, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed is withered, what's Peter saying to Jesus? He's saying, you did a great thing. Not great, good thing maybe. He killed a tree, but he did something ordinary people couldn't do. This is a miracle. We think of miracles as healing. This was a killing of a tree, but it's still a miracle. It was done by the power of God. Okay? Now, think of that. Peter is saying to Jesus, you did a miracle here. What does Jesus say in response to that? Have faith in God. Truly, I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Who's he talking to? He's talking to Peter and the apostles. He's saying, you guys are going to do things that are so great that talking about a tree dying is nothing in comparison. It took me a long time to realize that's what's going on here. Now, when he does this, I hope this doesn't upset anybody, but I want to read to you carefully what he says here. Have faith in God. Truly, I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, what mountain are they on? If you're reading about this, he's coming into Jerusalem from Bethany. What mountain is he standing on? No, Zion is the hills of Jerusalem itself. That's where the temple is. This is the Mount of Olives. No, Sinai is way, way south. It's the Mount of Olives, or Olivet, okay? And that's where he's standing, which is a good bit higher than Jerusalem. In fact, it's a great overlook place. My sister and her husband, and my mom and dad, for all that matter, when they were in Jerusalem, they walked down to the valley, which is called Kidron. They walked halfway up, which is the Garden of Gethsemane. Then they walked the rest of the way up and went over the top. If you go over the top, you can't see Jerusalem because it's just a little rise there, okay? And so my mom and dad, my sister and her husband did this because there's a couple of reasons I'll talk to you about in a minute. But they wanted to come back because then you come over and you see all of Jerusalem. And the top of the mountain is high enough above Jerusalem that you can really see the whole city. Now, the city today is a whole lot bigger than it was in the time of Jesus. But you got a view of the whole entire city, not just the Temple Mount, okay? They're standing on the Mount of Olives. Now, why is that important? If anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, is that mountain still there? Oh, yeah, it's still there. Did anybody ever say, go throw it into the sea? No. Was it ever going to happen that it was going to be thrown into the sea? No. But he says, go throw yourself into the sea, and this does not doubt in your heart, but believes that what you say will happen, it will be done for them. And by the way, what sea would it be thrown into? Is there a sea anywhere near Jerusalem? Where's the nearest sea? I'll give you a hint. It's the Sea of Galilee, which is about how many miles away? 40, 45. And the only other sea anywhere around there is the Mediterranean Sea, and that's like 70 miles away. There's no sea anywhere near to throw this mountain into. So folks, listen to me. Did Jesus mean somebody could pray and the literal Mount of Olives would be thrown into the sea? Did he mean that literally? No. What do you call that kind of language? It's not a lie. Hyperbolic or hyperbole, yeah, that kind of thing. It's called exaggeration for effect. And people have a hard time hearing that word exaggeration when they're talking about something in the Bible, or especially something that Jesus said. But Jesus a number of times exaggerated. And there's a lot of different times that I could show you this. But for example, one time Jesus was talking about Herod and he said, that old fox. Was Jesus literally calling Herod a fox? No. He was saying he was sneaky. You couldn't trust him. This is what's called hyperbole. That is, they were not thinking that the actual mountain of Mount Olives was going to be thrown into a sea when they heard him say this. I got a couple of hands, so.
You saying when we're like that, we don't have enough faith to do something like that?
He starts out saying, have faith in God. He's saying the tree is nothing compared to what you guys are going to do down the line. Now, were they ready to know that? Not really, even though they're 7 days away from the resurrection of Christ. He'd only been with them for 3 years, and they're still not quite getting what it is. Ken, did you want to say something?
I wanted to ask you, when he first seen the tree, said he was hungry.
Yep.
And when he got there, he cursed the tree because it was not leaves, but it said it was out of season.
Right.
So how do you put that all together?
Well, first of all, he killed a tree, which was a miracle, okay? But he wasn't mad at the tree, right? It was not the season for figs. There was a reason why there was no figs on it. And they knew that. They all knew that, okay? He did it to teach a lesson to his apostles. And here's where he's teaching the lesson. He's saying killing the tree was a miracle, but it's nothing compared to what you guys are going to do. That's why he says to them, have faith in God. And then he talks about this mountain being thrown into the sea. That's not literal language. It's emphasis for effect. And people do it all the time. I saw a TV show not too long ago where this woman was angry at her husband, and she says, I'm trying to help you here and you're biting my head off. Was he literally biting her head off? No, that's a figure of speech. It's exaggeration for effect. You with me? Now, it's pretty easy to understand that about the mountain. Bill, go ahead.
Well, I think one of his response where he says, have faith in God, I think Peter, what he was saying, he was astonished. You know, he was surprised. He said, look, the tree that you cursed is dying. Jesus is saying, I told it, I cursed it.
Yeah.
Why do you, have faith in God? And we got to remember that he's talking to the apostles about having faith and being able to do great things. He wasn't talking necessarily to us. He was talking to the apostles. I mean, they were raising the dead. They were doing miracles so people would believe. And that's what he's saying. He says, you guys got to have faith. And I think we see that faith come later on in Acts when they're doing all these great things. But, and I do agree that it's hyperbole. Why, what would be the purpose of moving them out? Other than just to show off or something.
That's definitely showing off. If you're going to try to throw a mountain into a sea when there's no sea anywhere near. Okay, now people don't have trouble with understanding this generally about the mountain, okay? But the very next sentence, which is worded almost exactly the same, people do have a lot of trouble with. And I wanted to go through the mountain and discuss it with you as being an exaggeration for effect. Because what's the very next thing? Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believing you have received it, it will be yours. Verse 25 is about a different thing. Now listen to this verse. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. Is that something that you think is correct in your daily life? Do you believe that if you ask for anything that you really want, God's going to give it to you? I don't. The Bible also teaches you need to pray in humility. You need to pray praising God. You need to pray thinking about other people, okay? But the words here say, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe you have received it and it will be yours. Are there people today who believe this exactly the way these words are? Yes, and I'm going to talk about them in a minute. What I'm saying to you is these words are also exaggeration for effect. By saying this to them, he's saying to the apostles, you can pray to God. He loves you. He cares for you. He will help you. But these literal words of saying whatever you ask in prayer, God will give it to you, that's exaggeration for effect also, just like throwing the mountain into the sea is exaggeration for effect. Now, why am I making a big point here? I'm going to give you two illustrations of this. Have you ever heard of name it and claim it? That phrase mean anything to any of you? Well, that's because you don't hear it here at church. But there are churches that teach a doctrine called name it and claim it. Has anybody ever heard of that phrase? You have? Okay. Name it and claim it. You have, okay. Well, I'm going to tell you two stories about name it and claim it that I saw with my own eyes. Years ago, I lived in Memphis, and I'm going to make these very, very short. I'm going to leave out a whole lot of things I could say. And I went over to hear this guy speak. I know. I really can't. It's possible. It's possible. As I say to Bill sometimes, start your clock. You'll see. It'll be under a minute, you know. It's possible. And that was on your time, not my time. And I went on and listened to this guy talking, and he went on and on and on about how if you just pray to God and you want it, you'll get it. That's simple. He said it straight out. He said it over 15 to 20 minutes, over and over and over again. He kind of ran out of breath. He took a breather there for a second, and a guy in the audience, not me, said, "So if I pray to God for a new pickup, I'll get a new pickup?" And then the guy tries to answer that guy's question. There was about 150 of us in the room. And he then, for the next 10 minutes, tells the guy why he's not going to get a pickup. God's going to tell me he's going to, but no, you're not going to get a pickup. And I'm looking over to the guy who asked the question. I could see him, and he's sitting over there. I'm not going to get my pickup. And I thought to myself, that's great. God will give you anything you want except for a pickup. You know, that's story number one. See, that was short, wasn't it? Okay, now here's one that's a whole lot more serious. This one is very personal to me. You guys know that my wife Val died in 2011, which is now what, 14 years ago. And there were two ladies who were sisters that came over to see Val, and she had not died yet. She was unconscious. She couldn't open her eyes. She couldn't talk. She couldn't get off the... She couldn't sleep in the bed, so I set up an army cot for her, had wheels on it, and that was in the back room we had. And so they came to see her, and they're looking at her, and then they wanted to talk to me, so I took them into the front room. And immediately these two women who go to the Assembly of God on Dodge Road started talking about name it and claim it. They said the words, not me. They said, look, we want Val to be recovered. We want Val to be completely whole and healthy. And so we prayed to God, and we named what we wanted to God, and it's going to happen. Val is in recovery, and we are here to tell you that we are so happy that Val is in recovery. And they went on to say that I should be happy too and be rejoicing with them. And then they went on to say, why aren't you happy and rejoicing like we are? I had to take a couple of deep breaths, and when I answered them, I did very quietly, and I said, if I saw any evidence of Val recovering, I would be rejoicing with you. But I'm not seeing evidence of Val recovering. I'm seeing evidence over the last couple of months of her slowly declining to the point where she can't open her eyes, she can't talk. And then I said, and by the way, she hasn't eaten anything in over 2 weeks. They were very angry at me for saying to them, that they were rejoicing because she was recovering, and I was not rejoicing because I was seeing no evidence of the recovery. So very soon after I said that to them, they decided it was time for them to go, and they left. 6 days later was Val's funeral. I knew somebody was going to ask me that. No, I remember clearly. Yes, they came to the funeral. But I'm going to be a little snarky here. They sure didn't talk to me about rejoicing for her recovery. So, you know, I couldn't kind of leave that one out.
Well, yeah, but in a sense, they were right because she was made whole.
That's not what they were saying.
We wanted it to be.
They were clear in saying that she was going to become normal healthy. Physically normal healthy. They said the words. And they said why? Because it was what their church taught them. And they believed it. Yeah, well, it's not. Now again, look at these verses, verse 24. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. Guess what verse in the Bible these ladies believed was saying what they were telling me? Right here. Mark 11:24. Was it teaching that? No, it's exaggeration for effect. They couldn't pray for anything they wanted and be satisfied they were going to get it. We can't either. As we've heard many times, God answers prayer. Yes, no, and wait. That kind of thing.
Proof of this is when Jesus was in the garden.
Yeah.
He had faith, he believed.
He asked the Father.
He prayed that he didn't have to go through what he was
Right.
going to go through.
And then the end of that verse, Jesus says what?
Not my will, but thy.
Not my will, but thy will be done.
That's something I was going to say. If it's God's will that those prayers are answered, it is that. Because I know a lot of people that have prayed, it's like, well, this says that if I pray for him, why did my son have to die? Or why did this
Right.
happen?
And they blame God.
And because they believed this first, they said, I prayed, I believed it was going to happen.
Right.
But it didn't happen, so that's not true. I don't believe God. But we got to understand that God is in control. And it's not in God's plan that that person was going to live. And so we have to go back to understanding our faith in God, that he knows what is best, and he is in control.
Yep.
And it was destined for one, that all men should die, so it's going to happen eventually.
Any other comments on this? Some people have, there are folks that if they heard what I'm saying here now, they'd be very, very angry at me. They'd be very angry at my two examples. Yeah. I think it's because we want to put rules on how language is used in the Bible when necessary. Those rules don't necessarily work that way. That is, there is exaggeration in the Bible. Jesus called Herod a fox. Herod's not a fox, he's a person. And there's a bunch of others that we could go find in the New Testament where things are said strongly, but you can't take them literally.
And I also think that we have to talk about his audience. He's talking to the apostles.
Yeah,
And so he's not talking to the general public and huge crowds. He's talking to the apostles who are given a special dose of spirituality and miracle working that's going to come on later on.
yeah.
So we've got to realize that he's talking to them. He's not talking to us.
And at this time, the apostles could do miracles. They could even lay their hands on somebody else for them to do miracles. That's over in that book of Acts.
That's after the day of Pentecost, right?
Yeah, after the day of Pentecost. No, they were doing miracles with Jesus when Jesus was walking around. He gave them authority to go heal.
They weren't laying hands on other people to give them.
Well, you're saying laying hands. A lot of times it didn't touch them. They were 10 feet away from them, maybe.
I know,
But the apostles could do miracles during the life of Jesus.
right, they were able to do miracles during that, but they weren't laying their hands on other people so that they could do miracles.
There's no record of that, no. That happens later on. Yes, very good. Okay, can we move on? Okay, down verse 25, and when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. This is maybe one of the hardest commands that Jesus ever gave. Is it hard for me to forgive people? Is it hard for people to forgive me? Yeah. Especially if I've done something mean or not nice to them or lied. There are people that hold a grudge the rest of their lives against somebody. They can't forgive anybody ever. And that's not healthy for yourself. Do you know what it causes in yourself? It causes your stomach to tighten up. You can give yourself an ulcer if you can't let things go. And there are some folks that get angry and they can't let it go. They can't let it go. 10 years later, they want to talk to you about how angry they became 10 years before. They can't let it go. Not letting it go is harmful to your health and harmful to other people around you. This is one of the we talked about these two teachings of Jesus here. 25 is one of the hardest commands in the Bible. To let it go and not hold a gripe forever. When you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them. Is that possible to do? Yes. Is it easy? No. It takes some thought, it takes some dedication, it takes some real prayer asking for God's help. But it's possible. If you believe it's not possible for you to let go of a grudge, you need to pray some more. Okay, any comments on that? We could talk about that a long time all by itself.
So, when it says forgive,
Yep,
it doesn't say forgive.
agreed.
So, you can forgive somebody for something they've done,
Yep,
but you still don't forget it because you could be putting yourself in danger of that happening again.
sure.
And I think a lot of people say, well, you forgive and forget. It doesn't say forgive and forget. It says
Yeah.
forgive. You don't hold it against them anymore, but yet you remember so that you don't put yourself in those situations where
Yeah.
you could be in danger.
If somebody lies to me, am I likely to believe what they say the next time? No. I remember the lie.
But there will be people that will say, you haven't really forgiven them because you still remember the lie.
Yeah. And some people don't, if they remember it, they will not forgive. So you got to separate the two. And yes, it can be done. It needs to be done. And Jesus here clearly says, forgive them so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. And this isn't the only time. I looked this up. This is like 5 times in the New Testament that it says basically these exact same words. And it'll say it stronger in some of the other places where it's found, where it says, and if you don't do it, he won't forgive your sins. Again, we could talk a long time about that, but maybe that's time to leave that. Okay, verses 27 through 33. We got time for this one. The end of the chapter, 11. They arrived again in Jerusalem. And when Jesus was walking in the temple courts, again, the temple courts. This is the area around the temple, okay? The chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now, who are those people called as a group? They're called the Sanhedrin. They're not just the religious leaders. They are also the government leaders. Now, Rome was the empire that controlled the country, but they let the local people run it. You understand what I'm saying? These were the civil government in Jerusalem, not just religious leaders. Okay. These guys have power. They can put you in jail, this kind of thing. The chief priests, teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you authority to do this? I like questions. We're going to come back to these questions in a minute. Verse 29. Jesus replied, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me. That, by the way, is in strong Greek and in English. That's a command. Tell me. Okay, verse 31. They, the chief priests, teachers of the law, and the elders, discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say of human origin, can't do that. They feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we don't know. Jesus said, neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. Jesus refused to answer their question, right? Why? Because they wouldn't answer his question, honestly. Now let's get back to that. They answered Jesus, we don't know. Was that a lie? Were they knowingly lying to Jesus? Yes, they were lying. They knew what they believed it was, that Jesus was not the Messiah, he was not the Son of God, he was just an ordinary guy. And John the Baptist was an ordinary guy, that John the Baptist was not from God. That's what they believed. But they knew the people all thought that John the Baptist was great and wonderful. And by this time, of course, John is dead. John the Baptist was dead. So when they said, we don't know, they lied. Okay, let's go back to the first questions back in 28. They said, by what authority are you doing these things, and who gave you authority to do this? Now, what are these things? Remember the page we just read? Him going through the temple grounds and throwing things around and stopping people from selling? He disrupted everything, but these people were letting them do that. The leaders of the temple were letting the people do that. They could have said, get out of the gate. They could have told them to go somewhere else. They didn't. They also made a profit themselves. Okay, so what's the answer to the question? By what authority are you doing these things? They're talking to Jesus. What's the correct answer to that question? God. I'm doing what God wants me to do. That's the answer, but he doesn't give them that answer. He gives them a response. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority. John's baptism, was it from heaven or human origin? Question, was John's baptism from heaven, or was it of human origin? What's the real truth answer to that? It was from heaven, meaning from God. John didn't make it up. John did what God told him to do, John the Baptist. Okay? John didn't do miracles, by the way, if you never noticed that. It was John's teaching that got people. They went out from him from all the cities. Thousands of people went out to hear John the Baptist preach. And oh boy, he said a whole bunch of things that the leaders of the Jews didn't like either. He was condemning them too for what they did. So anyway, Jesus asked them a question that in today's political world we would say was a gotcha question. Because either way you answer, you don't come out looking good, right? And he got them. They said, we don't know. And he said, neither will I tell you. Jesus could answer the question. He could have said to them, but he wasn't ready to do that for them. Any comments down through verse 33?
I think that they asked that question hoping that he would say, and that was from God, and they could say, see, he's blaspheming you.
Right. Oh, yeah, sure.
Afraid that they were trying to trap him.
They were trying to trap him. And many times earlier in Mark, the text has said they were trying to trap him in various questions. These were not honest questions to learn something from what Jesus. They were trying to get him killed.
They didn't really want the right answer. They just trying to
See, motive. Do you want to answer, or do you have an ulterior motive? You know what an ulterior motive is? The motive you don't want to talk about. They wanted him dead. That's what they wanted. And that's what they were working toward. And guess what? In a few days, they get it. Jesus is hung on the cross. It was the Jews that turned Jesus over to the Romans and said, kill him, crucify him. They got what they wanted. Within a week, they got what they wanted. And they thought it was going to be the end of the show, the end of the road. No more. Surprise.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Mark Hogan,
Okay.
he said, question for Terry. Can you forgive someone who is not sorry?
Okay.
So he's obviously.
No, that's, hey, Mark, we heard your question. Can you forgive someone who is not sorry? I think in a way that's kind of like two questions. Can you and should you? Should you forgive someone who's not sorry? But can you is a different thing. That's about what I can do. Okay, let's take the two questions. Can you and should you? Anybody want to have a pop on that in the next 5 minutes?
Yes and yes.
Okay, straight answer. Thank you. Yes, you can, and yes, you should.
You can forgive someone even though they don't have forgiveness.
Yes.
Because the people that hold grudges that don't have forgiveness, how can you pray and not forgive them?
Oh, you can do it real easy. You can say, God sent them to hell.
You're supposed to forgive them. Even though they're not asking for it, you can still forgive them for what they did.
You can. So would everybody agree you can, at least? Okay, now let's get to the tough one. Should you? Yeah, there's a few people here I think are saying, oh, I don't think so.
Because there was a song about somebody that wasn't forgiving, and it said they were going to forgive him, they were going to make him pay for it, and at the end of the song it said, because I didn't forgive him, I was a prisoner of myself, because it harbors that bad feeling. You can't worship. You have this thing there, and it just eats you up because you don't forgive him.
Is that a good reason to say the answer is yes, I should forgive them? Makes a little sense, yeah, because you're not hurting your own stomach.
God says we should forgive people for their trespasses. He doesn't tell us if they're sorry or not. He just says forgive people's trespasses.
Nathan? You had your hand up.
Yeah, I was gonna wait just a little bit more. I'll wait for a few more times before I get my.
Uh-oh.
We only got 2 minutes.
Yeah, the clock is ticking. You got about 3, really. But okay, folks, how about we all agreed pretty much you can. The question is, should you? Anybody else want to take a shot at that one? See, vengeance can be nice to the person that wants vengeance. It gives them, if nothing else, a reason for living, to be forever angry at the person who did me wrong. People can build their lives around that, whether they talk about it or not. So there can be a pleasure in vengeance, especially if you get vengeance. And I've understood that. In fact, I've had vengeance on a few folks, but I didn't do anything to get it. It just happened anyway. And it really made me smile because I got kind of back on them, but I didn't do anything. It just came. And I thought, wow. So there's pleasure in some of this. But is that healthy for me? Probably not too healthy for me. All right, you're down to 1 minute, guy. It's time to talk.
All right. Well, so this is a big controversy more down south, okay? We spend entire class times discussing this very thing.
Yeah.
And people will come, on one side or the other. No, you should forgive always, and others, no, you should only forgive when they have repentance. Well, here's the thing. Jesus says, if you don't forgive, your heavenly Father will not forgive you. He doesn't qualify it on if they repent or not.
Right here in verse 25. That's exactly what he says.
Right. And then on top of that, when I do hear the other side when they say, no, we should only forgive when they show repentance, when they show that they're sorry. But here's the thing. And they'll say, because God doesn't even do that. God doesn't forgive until there's repentance. Well, here's the problem. We don't forgive like God forgives. I don't require a sacrifice when I give forgiveness. When I give forgiveness, God does. So the equivocation is not really good. Not only that, but you're gambling with a lot, and here's why. Okay, if you take the side where yes, you have to wait for them to repent, and then you can forgive. Okay, if that ends up not being true,
If
you're in big trouble.
if what ends up not being true.
If that position ends up not being true.
Oh, then you're in trouble.
Yeah, because then you have to go to the Father, and He said, I told you,
Yeah.
if you didn't forgive, I wouldn't forgive you. You're in big trouble, so why not err on the side of caution and just forgive anyone anyways?
And I bet you, in some of these conversations in the South, and I live down there and I heard these conversations also, there's another little factor in that. And that is, how do I know the person has actually repented? Because they said they did. People ever say that they're sorry and they've changed their attitude when you don't know what's going on in their heart? And so the person who doesn't want to forgive can easily say, I don't know if they've actually repented, and they can still hold it against them when they don't know if they've even repented or not. It becomes a kind of a slippery slope, I think. Yeah.
And I think that sometimes too, that we have sins that we don't know that are actually sins as we go through the day. And we're expecting God to forgive us of those things as His followers. Because, sometimes we're not aware that we've actually committed a sin. And
Yeah.
we didn't ask forgiveness from God, but we expect Him to forgive us from those things.
Have you done something and maybe 5 years later realized you did a really bad thing? Oops, 5 years? Yeah.
Where does your soul stand for those 5 years?
That's another topic which we don't have time to talk about. Okay, we're done, guys. Thank you. We'll start chapter 12 next week.